California, recently relocated here about a year and a half ago. I have some extended family in the Southern California area, and I love the community. I really enjoy the welcome that we've received from our neighbors and whatnot. I work currently for Red Robin Restaurants, so if there's any fans out there, just let me know. And
Yum.
yes, yum altogether, one, two, yum. And I've been in the business most of my life. I've owned businesses for the last 15 years or so, and recently stepped down to working for somebody else, because sometimes owning your own business has its challenges. So let's put it that way. And so time for me to turn that over to somebody else. And I enjoy what I do. I like providing service to other people, and most definitely like to be involved in what I see going on around me. So that's me. So, well, thank you all for letting me be part of this.
Thank you.
And I'm Margaret Kirker. I'm originally from Scotland, came here via Australia, where I met my husband, who's from New Jersey. It gets very confusing. And the first place he brought me here was to Boston. And he brought me here from the center of Australia, which is desert, worse desert than here. And Boston was a real step up because it had laundromats and paved sidewalks, and they had shops instead of just a train coming by once a month or so. So that was my first introduction to America. We then went to Saudi Arabia, and when we came back, Boston had its big growth with the railway. And so houses that were cracker box were going for a fortune, $40,000 at that time. And so we rented here in Apple Valley, actually, and started looking for a house. Apple Valley was build your own type thing. And we weren't equipped for that. We need somewhere to live now. So we chose to live in the old Tatum tract because it's right off the freeway. It was right by shops, right by the library. Fantastic place to live, right in the center of town. Of course, you know what's happened now. It's slightly different. That my background is that I'm a nurse and a midwife, and I have a master's in business administration. I've been in the Rotary Club of Victorville for over 30 years. Let's see, whatever it is, it's much more than 30, I think it's like 39. And very involved in service to the community and involved in community organizations all the time that I've been here. And very pleased to be on this committee and to be able to offer some insight and some value. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Michael?
Great. Good evening, Mr. Metzler, city staff, members of the committee, and members of the Zoom committee that are with us, or the Zoom community that are with us this evening. My name is Michael Kraus, and I am a proud U.S. Army veteran out of Fort Irwin, California. I was stationed with the 11th ACR out there in 2000, and when I got out of the military, I looked around, I said, where do I want to live? And I checked out a lot of cities, and I said, Victorville is where I'm going to stay. So when I got out of the Army, I just landed right here in Victorville and been here ever since, and excited to work with all of you. And you know, I currently am the Chief Financial Officer for the Adelanto Elementary School District, so that's what I do during the day. And then excited to be here on the committee to be able to help write the next chapter of the City of Victorville as we move forward with all of the great things that city staff have planned, the City Council, and the vision that's really out there, because my family's here, I'm here, and we want to be a part of what's going on and be involved in that. And I think this is a way to help give back and really participate. And also, like Margaret, I'm a proud Rotarian in the City of Victorville, so excited to join the Rotary and all of the things that they get to do as well. So that's exciting, and looking forward again to the next chapter. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you. And then Mr. Creffield?
Well, hello, everybody. First off, sorry I was unable to be there in person. I had a trip planned, but I promise I'll be with all of you for future meetings. Again, my name is Mark Creffield. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater High Desert Chamber of Commerce. Effective as of January 1st, the Adelanto, Apple Valley, Hesperia, and Victor Valley Chambers of Commerce merged to the Greater High Desert. chamber, and we're very excited about that, even having more value to our businesses in the community. Next month will be my 4-year anniversary when I moved my family from Northern California to the city of Victorville, and we bought our house in Victorville. Really just excited to be on this committee. This is very important for the city of Victorville, and it's just an absolute honor. I'm married. I have 2 boys that are going through the Snowline School District system, and we couldn't be happier to live in the high desert. So again, I look forward to seeing you all in person real soon, but it's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mark. With that, thank you for those introductions. We'll go ahead and how about we turn it over to item number 3, which is Brown Act compliance. Because this body was appointed by the city council, we actually are required to conform to the Brown Act, which basically makes this meeting a public meeting, which also constitutes the need to open it up to public comment, which is why we started the meeting the way we did. But there's a number of other compliance requirements that we'll have to follow as well. So the city clerk is the individual that's primarily responsible for helping at least run our city council meetings and making sure we're Brown Act compliant there. She also has the assistance from either the city attorney, or in this meeting's case, we have the deputy city attorney on the line. I see Ms. Tara Taguchi up there as well. She's one of our deputy city attorneys. But at this point in time, I'd turn it over to Charlene for any comments she might have regarding Brown.
And welcome. I'm going to go over about Brown Act basics. The purpose of the Brown Act is to promote transparency and public participation in local government. In order to meet this objective, governmental bodies must provide public notice of their meetings, post agendas of the subjects to be discussed, and provide public access to give the opportunity for the public to speak regarding any matter within the body's jurisdiction. A meeting is any gathering of a majority of the members of the legislative body to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item which is within the subject matter jurisdiction. There are some exceptions to that rule, and it's if you attend conferences, community meetings, social or ceremonial occasions, individual contacts, meetings of other legislative bodies. And if you have any questions at any time, you can just talk. And per the governor's executive order, N29-20, most of the Brown Act teleconference rules or requirements were waived or suspended at this time, such as posting of the member's location, a quorum of the body to be within the jurisdiction. At this time, public meetings must be accessible telephonically or otherwise electronically. Public participation is always encouraged. Anyone can attend an open meeting. You cannot require names if they don't want to provide it. They may record on any type of device, video, audio. And then there's also some things to be very aware of, such as serial meetings. Serial meetings are prohibited. Emails and texting are included. A majority may not, outside of a meeting, use a series of communication to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business. The Brown Act prohibits the use of communication by a majority of the members to develop a collective concurrence as to actions being taken on any item by members of the body. For an example, if member A contacts member B to express his or her opinion on a city-related issue, member B communicates with member C, that is a violation. Another example is when a person acts as the hub of the meeting. Like member A communicates individually with the various folks, members B and C. Serial meeting has a so on an intermediate, such as a staff member contacts at least a quorum of the members to develop a collective concurrence on the actions to be taken by the legislative body is also a Brown violation. So, and just another tip is when you receive an email from any of us or from each of you, do not reply to all. That's just a safety net for everyone. It's just so you don't violate a Brown Act or it can be considered a serial meeting. It's just safe to never just reply to all. And then I want to end with any city-related business is subject to public disclosure under the Public Records Act. All communications relating to city business, even through private electronic devices, are public records, and they can be subject. And if you have any questions, I hope I can answer, or our deputy city attorney. Yes.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for that information about the Brown Act. One question I did have, are we subject to Form 700 as a committee?
No, you are not.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Any other questions of the city clerk?
Nope.
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and jump into number 4, and then I'll eventually turn it over to Mr. Camargo. But first, really today's intent was to assemble the committee, kick things off for the committee, provide you with as much information as possible, and leave you with that information, really expecting no action today, but expecting action as early as next week. And so the genesis for this committee being in place has everything to do with one document that's actually in the binder, which is resolution number 20-83. And that was a resolution approved by the Victorville City Council last year. I believe it was in October of last year. And it was the goal of the council, as a result of it having had already authorized the placement of the Measure P general tax measure on the November 2020 ballot. The council decided as a part of that to try to ensure additional form of oversight to help overcome the concerns the public might have about monies being spent inappropriately or not consistent with the actual intent of Measure P, that it form a Measure P oversight committee, and that's effectively what this is. And it goes so far as to define the makeup of the Measure P committee. And in fact, each of you that are here today represent a particular category, a particular board position on this committee. So for example, Mr. Pelishuk, you're the representative for the local major retail seat on this committee. Mr. Creffield is the representative of the local Chamber of Commerce position. Mr. Kraus is the resident member of education. Is that correct, Tony? And then Ms. Cooker is the resident member of the senior community. And that's correct as well, right, Tony? And so each of you are appointed with the goal of representing those particular segments, because it was those particular segments, along with the 3 others that are unfilled, that the council felt were necessary to make sure they had proper representation when it comes to ensuring that these new dollars generated by Measure P are spent for consistent with the intent. And one of the things, and we've been working on this, Tony and I have been working on this probably starting back in January after it was known that Measure P in fact was approved. We really had been putting the effort of putting a document in place that is really intended to survive us, in the sense that this committee could last as long as the council wants it to exist. They would actually have to take an action to rescind the resolution to disband the committee. So we're acting as if this committee, this commission has life for some time. So this is a document that we envision surviving a long time. And so that something subjective as to interpreting intent, so that it doesn't get clouded in future years. One of the goals of us as staff was to put in front of this committee, what is the intent? What are the policies? What are the goals? So that we have something referenced or something that we can reference back to make sure as we take actions this year and years to come, we can always point back to a foundational document to say yes or no. And so with that, the council had envisioned that with this group, there'll be a couple of opportunities during the course of a year. And those couple of opportunities during the course of the year, one is going to be prior to it considering, it being the council, it considering its annual budget, which it's preparing to do. it needs feedback from this group as to whether or not what's being recommended in the budget is consistent with the intent of Measure P. So one of the things that Tony will talk through is how we are setting up the accounting. We have a chart of accounts just like you would in your business. But we have a fund account specifically for Measure P, so it's easier to see revenues in and expenditures out. But one of the things that this committee is expected to do, and we're hoping to do it at next week's meeting, once we have submitted the proposed budget to you, is to review that budget, compare what's in that budget proposed as expenditures, and offer an opinion to the city council prior to it adopting its budget. And that opinion being yes or no, does what's included in the budget conform to the intent of Measure P? So that's one time that the council envisioned this group getting together and offering a very important position in that regard. The second time that the council, per this resolution, expects this group to get together and cast another opinion is after the closeout of the fiscal year, when the audit is actually complete. Did the organization, in fact, spend the money consistent with Measure P? So those are really going to be the 2 points of time. And so just to give perspective on the time frame as to when those are expected to occur during the year. The first one being opinion as to whether or not the budget conforms to Measure P is right around now. It's going to be about May of every year. Because we try to submit the budget. We'll have our first workshop with the council on the budget the 25th. It's currently expected that the council wouldn't approve the budget until June 15th this year. But then the time for which the committee would get together to actually review and affirm or cast opinion against the actual expenditures conforming would be when we complete our audit. We typically take the audit back to the council. We'd like to do it in January, but realistically it comes in either into January or early February of every calendar year. And that's closing out and giving opinion as to the closeout of the books for the previous fiscal year. Michael?
Mr. Metzler, on the audit, is it staff that complete the audit, or is there an independent audit firm that would come in and audit the Measure P?
Independent auditor. No, that's a good question. Yeah, there is an independent auditor. It'd be the same auditor used to audit all of the city books. There would just be a separate review of what we're calling Fund 105 is the fund number assigned to Measure P. So with that, that's effectively the role that this committee is intended to serve and asked to serve by the council pursuant to that resolution. So with that, the resolution is contained in here. The policy document is something we want you to get very familiar with as well. Because next week we intend to bring back an item for you to consider and cast the opinion as to does what's submitted conform with the actual intent of Measure P. Along that way, and I should say, and maybe give some of the history leading up to how Measure P even began. Measure P in large part was resulted from the council directing staff to start looking at what it's going to take to start enhancing the public services. There was a period of time over the course of the past few years leading up to the ultimate decision by the council to place the measure on the ballot last June. The council had gotten a lot of complaint from residents, need more police, need more fire services, need more code enforcement, need more animal control, parks and rec. There was a great demand for public service, and the public safety plan was a large part, and that's a document that's actually contained in here as well. That wasn't intended to be the Bible as to how we're going to move forward, but it was actually an analysis and a study that really looked at, based upon what the council was looking for in terms of certain enhancements to public services, what is it going to take to get there? What are the options from a revenue perspective? And at the end of the day, the best revenue option for the council to try to fulfill some of those goals that it was developing resulted from residential complaint was Measure P. Measure P is a 1%, it's technically called a transactions and use tax. A lot of people call it just another sales tax. They're collected practically the same way. But effectively, it is a tax that's added on to the point of sale. And because it's a general tax, it doesn't have very special restrictions as to its expenditure. Two different types of taxes in our world: a general tax, which can be spent on general purpose kind of stuff, whereas a special tax actually has to be spent on a very specific intended purpose. This one has the generality to it. So monies could be spent on police, fire. It could technically be spent on anything that is within the purview and discretion of the city council. And that's in large part why this committee was formed, is despite the general nature in which those taxes are collected and can be spent, that's why the council actually envisioned having this committee to make sure that still, regardless of the flexibility we have as a city and being able to spend that money, that there's oversight still making sure that we're being true to the original intent of Measure P.
Good question.
Yeah.
Sales tax, this tax is already being collected, but it's not in the city budget. What's happening to that money? Is it being held until after the budget is formed?
So, and that's a good question. The effect of the tax, the effective date of the tax was April 1st. And we have in fact confirmed that it has been assessed. It is being assessed. And the way the flow of funds works is at Red Robin, for example, the new tax will apply effective April 1st. And that collection is made. His actual collection of taxes through the receipts then get paid to the state of California. State Department of Tax and Fee Administration, I believe is what they call themselves now. And they're basically the entity that collects it all and then distributes it to us and any other entity that shares in the sales tax. As of today, I'm not aware that we have physically gotten that pass through from the state. I believe we're expecting sometime in mid to late June to actually start getting the first deposits of that April 1st collection. So it's being collected. We haven't received it. We have budgeted some expenditures because one of the things in the way the world of accounting works is even if we receive that money in June or July, if it was for a period where it was actually collected in April, in the accounting world, we'll journal that back to April and it'll actually be available to offset expenditures that were budgeted against that money. But in terms of what we currently have budgeted for Measure P, where do we stand on that?
For this
In the-
year,
in the current fiscal
for this
year?
current fiscal year, we have the opening of Station 315. And proposed was the additional code enforcement officer, but it looks like that's on track to be funded for next year's budget.
Okay, so there's some very minor appropriations made in the current fiscal year budget that the council made to really intended to help achieve the target open date of Station 315 by July 3rd. And so to physically stand that station up and get it operational July 3rd, because the physical structure is there, there's been things needed to be purchased, outfitting the facility, make sure it's habitable, whether it's, what are some of the things that you had to buy?
Your office furniture, your cleaning supplies, your technology equipment, just your basic home furnishings that will need to supply that actual fire station.
So the amounts that have been budgeted that will get charged against Measure P in this fiscal year are fairly small. But when it comes to the actual staffing and the incurrence of expense for those firefighter paramedics that are planned to start July 3rd, that's what you would see, for example, as an expenditure item in the Measure P budget going forward.
Mr. Missler, I had a piggyback question onto Margaret's question. So the money is collected, it's sent up to the state until they distribute it back to the city. Is there interest earned on that money? And if so, who gets the interest on the money that the state's holding that technically is the city's money?
I don't look at it that closely. Do you know if there's a pass-through of interest? I'm not aware of one.
No, there's not. Yeah, I think that it's all in the collection of it, and then when they distribute it, the administrative costs and all that stuff that needs to go into in the paperwork and the follow through on distributing those out to the entities, whether it's counties or cities, take some time. So that's
Right.
the catch up game, but there is on the local side, there's no interest gained from it that we realized that we would get, and I don't believe so even on the state side.
But the minute it touches our hands, then it goes into a operating, interest bearing operating account, which is not going to generate much, or maybe late. We've got a very conservative fiscal policy here, so we try to put as much in labor as possible, which still isn't going to yield a lot, but it's yielding something.
Well, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that the city's getting every penny
Fair
that it
share.
deserves. So,
Right.
in the day.
No doubt, no doubt. Let's see. So we started with that. So, no, that was a good question. That was on the collection of the tax. And so with that, that may be the largest part of the introduction that I was hoping to share with you as to why you're here, how many times you're going to meet. We'd like to meet again next week with the vision of actually reviewing what is the then current draft budget. We're knee deep in budgets, so it's changing practically every day, it seems. But I think we got a good handle on Measure P. And then with that, I think what I was driving at with respect to the public safety plan, that was really serving as a template to provide justification for the council to suggest that they were not wanting to place a tax measure on the ballot unless there was clear justification for it. We actually did a fairly extensive cash flow modeling of the general fund without Measure P, of course, a general fund with Measure P, and of course, it became clearly easy to demonstrate the need for it. And so we're fortunate that it got passed. Now that it's got passed, it's going to be our role to recommend and advise to the council whether or not those monies are being spent consistently. So, Tony, you want to take it from here?
Yeah.
Unless there's any other questions for members of the committee. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Messler. I think you touched almost on every subject on the purpose of the Measure P funding and the eligible projects. Some of the notable projects that I would like to mention are the, for Measure P, is the police enhancement that was recently approved by the council for the Schedule A. So that is going to bring an increase of 11 sheriff personnel, which includes your 5 sheriff deputies, your 5 sheriff specialists, and your 1 crime analyst. The second notable project, I think, for Measure P that stands out is you're going to see the code enforcement side switch from a reactive to a proactive. By doing that, we'll be adding an additional 5 code enforcement officers, and they'll be attacking with the plan of increasing your regulatory task force, rental locations, illegal dumping, and addressing severely blighted areas across the community. So that's something the community, I think, will enjoy and recognize. And one of the larger projects that Mr. Messler just mentioned was the opening of Station 315. In order to open that station, we need to hire 6 new firefighters. That station will be funded 100% through Measure P, as well as all of the equipment, including new Type 1 apparatus. So those are the large notable projects that I think that stand out, especially associated with the cost. In the books and the binders that you guys were presented today, as Mr. Messler mentioned, everything is included from the policy document that staff has written, the bylaws and the resolution. We have the safety plan, which a lot of the costs from Measure P for next year's budget are based off of. We have our transaction ballot, all of the backup from the ordinance and the resolution on how that item was placed on the agenda and actually on the voting ballot. We have our cash flow model that in this binder is a sample, but this is what we will be basing off our recommendation next week on the expenses. Also, one of the main objectives for next week's meeting is to confirm that Measure P's intent is in compliance with it. So in this binder, we have 2 samples of transmittal letters. These transmittal letters will come from the Measure P Oversight Committee as a whole, and be presented to the city council, stating that Measure B either does or does not comply with the Measure B intent. So if you guys have time, we'd like for you kind of just to look over not only the binder, but the transmittal letters to see which letter you prefer and which ones you guys suggest on staff recommending. One's a more formal, thorough letter that kind of just states that the council, or I'm sorry, that the oversight committee is recommending that it's in compliance, pretty much yes and no. And the second letter is going to be a little bit more detailed. It breaks it out by department with a brief explanation on what the large target items are in cost and what those items will be. So again, if you guys have time, we recommend you look at those so staff can prepare that transmittal letter when you guys are ready to present that to council. You guys have any questions about this binder or anything Measure P related? I would love to try and answer those for you. Yes,
So I
sir.
have a question about consensus amongst the committee. So you have two letters here, for example. We have 4 members. What about for 2 to 2? 2 like one, 2 like the other? How is that going to work until we get a quorum of 7 at some point?
So because we have quorum right now of the 4, and I don't believe we'll have the vacant 3 spots filled by then. So we'll have to have the majority of these 4 members in order to push that recommendation to the city council.
And how will that take place? Will we just email staff? How would we notify you with, for instance, which letter we prefer?
So I think at next week's meeting,
Okay,
we
got
can
it.
just discuss on which letter you prefer.
Got it.
And then staff will draft that transmittal letter and then obviously send it to you guys for review before it's sent out to the council.
Okay, great.
And I think maybe just to quantify some of what is in motion already, I'll share with you and even share some of what the goal was when we did the study. And so, for example, Mr. Camargo just mentioned the 11 bodies on the sheriff department side. That's something that's actually already in motion. It's one of those items where it takes advance notice to not only identify what the increased staffing need is going to be for the contract, but then once we identify those staffing personnel, in the sheriff's case, they've got to go through a recruitment process and in many cases a training process. So what we've tried to do really with the goal of trying to start as much of what we can as possible by July 1st, the start of our fiscal year, there are some things already in motion. So for example, the council has already taken it upon itself to approve what's called a Schedule A. You'll commonly hear the Schedule A in the context of sheriff. That's the official contract document that we use now that basically prescribes all of the staffing level that the city contracts to the county sheriff for. So in the case of the sheriff department, what is included in your item here today, which will also then be included as part of the budget, there are 11 bodies contemplated as an enhancement to the sheriff department service. And the way that breaks down, I want to share with you because I've seen it in the past be done with not a lot of logic or thought, and that's not being disparaging. We've seen it in cases where, okay, we just want to add 1 or 2 deputies because that's what we can afford. In this particular case, the prescription of the 11 actually stems from what we were trying to accomplish with the intent of the Measure P, the public safety plan. And a large part of the public safety plan when it came to police services was really focused in large part on trying to attend to those areas where we're clearly deficient. And there were some deficiencies identified, and we would hear the complaints. In fact, our council heard the complaints when we were at the city council meetings. And one of the ones, which just it sounded hard to believe, let's say, but we would hear the complaints that, hey, I called 911, I had a breaking and entering, somebody broke into my house. It took 3 hours for a deputy. It's hard to believe that, but when we dug deep into it, there was some truth to it. But there was also a lot of reason for it as well. And that lot of reason is because so many of our deputies assigned to patrol and even to traffic even the traffic folks were pulled off of traffic and put into patrol because they were responding to higher priority calls, whether it's in the commercial districts of the community, or maybe you got a very serious issue at a bank going on. Victorville is a very busy community from the public safety perspective. So when it came to some of these lesser priority stuff, or as they characterize them as lesser priority, we were not responding to those as well as we could. So when it came to the recommendation about staffing, it wasn't so much focused on just putting deputies on the street. We actually have a mix where we're putting deputies on the street. We're also placing non-sworn, what they call in the police department, sheriff service specialists, where they're capable of handling some of those other types of calls, those other types of situations where you don't have suspect contact, there's no more threat to life. Maybe it's a traffic accident that requires a little bit of investigation and documenting. Instead of pulling the sworn deputy to those kinds of scenes, because of the nature of our work, keep the deputy focused on the higher priorities and use non-sworn to actually start attending to some of those lower priority calls. Because those, if I call, I'm not a frequent flyer of the 911 system, but if I call and somebody broke into my house, it's going to feel like a priority to me. And so I think the majority of the residents feel the same way. So when we developed this staffing model, it was really intended in the case of those lower priorities, let's get better response. Second part of it speaks to traffic. And so those sworn deputies that we're focusing on in this upcoming budget as an example, those sworn deputies, I've asked the police chief, let's focus those on traffic, because one of the statisticals that we studied, and you'll see it in the report, is you can actually see traffic citations go down. And we're by all means not targeting people, that's not our goal, but it is a measuring tool as to our proactive policing. And actually, a traffic stop is a big part of our proactive policing. You'd be surprised at some of the things that we find just from pulling somebody over for a speeding violation. And it can lead into something else, such as drugs and guns. But the less and less we're doing traffic enforcement, that means the less and less we're doing of proactive policing enforcement, because we're too busy responding to the priority ones. So our goal with the 5 deputies is to prioritize them for traffic as well, to try to increase or enhance our proactive policing, but also to address the obvious, which we all see out there, which is a behavior of driving that is just absolutely obscene, that's contributing, I think, in large part to a lot of the really nasty collisions that we're seeing out there. So the expectation is with these bodies, you're going to have, or new bodies, you're going to have more presence out there on the street. You'll see, visibly deputies writing tickets and enforcing the traffic laws. And then one position that the police chief is really, really keen on is enhancing our investigative side of the house. And so one of the positions, so there's 5 sworn deputies, 5 non-sworn, and then one position designed specifically as a crime analyst. And that's an individual that's dedicated to solving crimes, working with the detectives, analyzing information, data, trends, what's going on in neighboring cities, kind of stuff. And so those are, when you see those, that's why Measure P is necessary. They're big spendy items. But it was also, for example, the police case, it was done so not just grabbing a number out of the air. There was actually some real thought process, and a lot of that thought process you'll find in the public safety plan. So with that, hopefully you'll get a chance to take a look through that. Obviously, if you have any questions of us, we're available. We're a resource. We'll answer whatever question we got, and we'll try to give the best answer that we have. Any questions for us? And then I think the advice with respect to nomination of a chair or vice chair was to
wait until the full 7 members are appointed. So at the time of the 7 full members of the committee, we'll host a meeting, and then we can appoint the chair and vice chair for off your guys' vote.
And that was the advice we got from the city attorney.
Correct. That was our legal advice.
And so you can wait to do the terms at that same time.
Correct. So because 4 of the members will serve on the committee for 4 years, and the other 3 will serve on for 2, And because it's a lottery draw, I think it's fair, and we've been told legally it's fair, that we'll do that draw once all 7 members are here. And then at the time of the drawing, we can conduct the appointment for the chair and vice chair.
All right, that's what we've got. And then date and time for our next meeting?
We're looking at same day next week, same time, 5 p.m. next Thursday.
So we'll convene here.
Correct.
So with that, unless there's any other questions from members of the committee.
Can I just make a quick comment, please? I just wanted to thank Tony and city staff for putting this binder together, and it's the public safety plan is a heck of a read, but I really appreciate all of this information, and I just wanted to thank you for providing that to me. Thank you, and to the committee.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. All right, with that, I'll entertain. How about I just adjourn the meeting? Can I do that?
Yes.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Bye, Mark.
Bye, Mark.